Hello, I'm James Ezimoha and you're watching A News. Here are top stories. Markets bounce back after US President Trump announces a 90-day pause on most new tariffs. US President Donald Trump warns military action against Iran is still on the table ahead of nuclear talks. US and Russian officials are in talks in Istanbul to ease tensions and restore their diplomatic missions. Wall Street posted its biggest gains since 2008 after US President Trump announced a 90-day pause on most new tariffs. The move also sparked a rebound across global markets despite rising trade tensions with China.
US financial markets roared back to life after Wall Street's worst four-day stretch since the pandemic. The S&P 500, a key index that tracks the performance of 500 major American companies, jumped nearly 10%, its biggest daily gain since the 2008 financial crisis. The Dow Jones rose by almost 3,000 points, while the tech-navy Nasdaq soared more than 12%. The surge came after US President Donald Trump announced a sudden 90-day pause on most new tariffs, easing fears that his trade policies could trigger a global economic slowdown. While a blanket 10% tax hike on nearly all US imports remains in place, the more aggressive duties on dozens of countries have been paused. However, tensions with China escalated, with Trump imposing a new 125% tariff on Chinese imports, retaliation for Beijing's own 84% tariff on American goods set to begin Thursday.
If nothing changes, 125% tariffs on Chinese exports to the U.S. is immense. We import a massive amount, hundreds of billions of dollars from China. That will have to go somewhere else. I think it's going to rapidly change supply chains for companies who now operate heavily in China. That's already been happening the last few years. You know, the seeds were sown for a lot of movement for companies like Apple and Nike and many others to shift to countries like Vietnam and India and other South Asian countries where production costs are obviously lower than they would be in the US. Which is why the reciprocal tariffs were so damaging, is because the scope was so broad. There was really nowhere to hide.
Even with the sharp gains, US markets remain below levels seen before Trump's original tariff announcement on the 2nd of April. But the president's reversal was enough to lift investor sentiment and prompt financial institutions such as Goldman Sachs to roll back recession forecasts. The US Treasury also successfully auctioned $39 billion in 10-year bonds.
We saw a bit of a sell-off in bonds overnight that drove yields up sharply, where we saw the 10-year Treasury yield go up over 4.5. Now, I'm going to say that's important because things like car loans and mortgages are benchmarked off the 10-year Treasury. So that means if that yield is going up substantially, you're going to pay more for cars and mortgages. That's not good, right? The question is, what's going on? The volume of trading. Was this China dumping some of the assets that they hold, or was there something else going on? Well, the good news is we had an auction from the Treasury today at 1 o'clock. There was very strong demand for that same 10-year Treasury bond, which means there's no issue. People still have a lot of faith in the credit worthiness of the United States.
In response, China filed a new complaint with the World Trade Organization, accusing Washington of unilateral bullying and vowing to defend its economic interests under international trade rules. Despite the ongoing tensions, Chinese markets opened higher. The Shanghai Composite rose 1.3%, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index gained 3%. Still, concerns lingered as China's yuan weakened to its lowest level since 2007. That rebound in sentiment extended across the Asia-Pacific region. Japan's Nikkei 225 surged 8.6%, Taiwan's TAIEX jumped 9.3%, and South Korea's Kospi climbed 4.8%, all reflecting relief over the temporary pause in tariff escalation.
Economists are warning that US President Donald Trump's tariffs could destabilize economies across Asia leading to potential job losses and social unrest. Countries reliant on U.S. exports could face significant challenges if tax hike uncertainty continues.
There could be widespread job losses and social unrest in parts of Asia over US President Donald Trump's sweeping 10% tariffs on all imports. That's according to Singapore-based economist May Yuan. May says that countries whose economies rely heavily on exports to the US, such as Vietnam, Cambodia and Bangladesh, face serious risks.
So for the people in Vietnam or Thailand, if they work in the factories now, it's not easy anymore for them to find jobs there. If there were no tariffs, then they might enjoy a large raise, bigger package. But if there is reciprocal tariffs, these factories might need to be relocated again. So definitely very bad news for those workers there. So that's for the supply side. Plus the worry about the uncertainty, right? Now, those countries have 90 days for 10%. Nobody knows what will happen after 90 days, right? So maybe Vietnam will face 46% again, right? So that means potential investors will hold back. They won't do any large-scale investment in those countries.
He also believes social unrest could be possible, particularly in countries where it exists already.
Massive unemployment because of this policy, because of the tariffs, then I think it's a real possibility. But it also depends on how the government responds, right? Bangladesh already had a large scale kind of social unrest a few months ago. Maybe a little push would also trigger another even bigger social unrest.
While trillions were erased from the markets during the last week, the long-term effects of the tariffs have yet to be felt around the world.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has welcomed US President Donald Trump's announcement to pause reciprocal tariffs. She's calling it a step towards stabilizing global economy. In a written statement shared on X, von der Leyen stressed that clear and predictable conditions are essential for smooth trade and supply chains. She reiterated her position that tariffs are taxes that hurt businesses and consumers, once again advocating for zero-for-zero tariff agreement between the EU and the US. Joining us now is Manu Makdam with a closer look at China's latest diplomatic financial moves as it navigates rising trade tensions with the United States, with Beijing intensifying meetings with EU and ASEAN officials to renew push for UN internationalization.
As a response to the escalating trade war with the United States, China is now intensifying its economic diplomacy with the European Union and the Association for Southeast Asian Nations. Recently, China's Commerce Minister Wang Wentao engaged in talks with EU Trade Commissioner Maroš Šefčovič to enhance trade and economic cooperation. Both parties expressed a commitment to fostering a favorable business environment and addressing trade concerns with dialogue. At the same time, China's financial regulators are accelerating the push to internationalize the yuan by promoting its use in cross-border trade settlement in the BRICS and ASEAN region. This initiative aims to reduce the reliance on US dollar and strengthen the economic integration in the region. Meanwhile, the escalating tariff war between the United States and China has forced Goldman Sachs to cut its growth projection for the Chinese economy to 4% for 2025 and 3.5% in 2026. Earlier projections put these figures at 4.5% and 4% respectively. As the economic uncertainty remains a key factor in defining the global trade dynamics, it seems that Beijing may seek to mitigate potential risk by improving its relations with other partners. Manu Makdam, A News, Beijing, China.
Just days before expected nuclear talks, U.S. President Donald Trump has warned that military action against Iran remains on the table. He added that Israel would be the leader of any operation. However, Iran says it's open to negotiations.
US President Donald Trump says he hasn't ruled out military action as an option against Iran. His comment comes just days ahead of anticipated nuclear talks between the two nations on Saturday in Oman. Speaking to reporters at the White House, Trump said Israel would be the leader of any military strike if Tehran refuses to abandon its nuclear weapons ambitions.
But with Iran, if it requires military, we're going to have military. Israel will obviously be very much involved in that. He'll be the leader of that. But nobody leads us. We do what we want to do.
While Trump earlier characterized the talks as direct, Iran has insisted that any engagement will be indirect. The United States is increasingly alarmed by Iran's progress, with officials saying Tehran is closer than ever to developing a viable nuclear weapon. The US Treasury Department has imposed a new round of sanctions targeting Iran's nuclear program. These include 5 entities and 1 individual for their roles in supporting nuclear development. Among those designated are the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran and several affiliated companies. Meanwhile, US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth says he hopes the outcome from the weekend's negotiations will be a peaceful one.
I mean, President Trump's been clear on that. Iran should not have a nuclear bomb, nuclear weapons. We very much hope the president is focused on doing that peacefully. That's very much what we would prefer as well. Our job at the Defense Department is to make sure we have all the assets available for any possible contingency.
Hegseth confirms the deployment of B-2 bombers to the US-British base on the Indian Ocean island of Diego Garcia. Experts say the stealthy B-2s, capable of carrying the heaviest bombs and nuclear weapons, are now in a strategic position for operations in the Middle East. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian reiterated on Wednesday that Iran is not after a nuclear bomb and expressed openness to US investment if a nuclear agreement can be reached.
As Iran and the US prepare for high-stakes nuclear talks in Oman at the weekend, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian strikes a firm tone, rejecting weapons ambition but stands by Iran's nuclear progress. Turaj Shiralilu has more from Tehran.
In the prelude to the upcoming negotiations between Iranian and US diplomats to be held on Saturday in Oman, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian said that Iran is not after military weapon and also added that Iran will not compromise on its nuclear achievements. Following Mr. Pezeshkian's remarks, which were made on the National Day to commemorate nuclear achievements, a number of foreign politicians have also expressed their views on the current situation on Iran's nuclear negotiations. UN Secretary General spokesman Stefan Dujarric expressed the hope that Iran and US will be able to settle their differences through negotiations, and also said that he is very hopeful that the upcoming negotiations will be fruitful and positive. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova also said that it was the short-sighted Western politicians who created the current situation, the stalemate in Iran's nuclear program negotiations. She also made these remarks after a trilateral meeting of deputy foreign ministers of Iran, Russia, and China in Moscow. And Turkish foreign minister as well, Mr. Hakan Fidan, has expressed the hope that there wouldn't be any military adventurism in the region against Iran, as it will exacerbate the current situation in the Middle East region. This is Turaj Shiralilu reporting from Tehran for A News TV.
US and Russian officials are in talks in Istanbul to ease tensions and restore their diplomatic missions. It's after recent strains over the war in Ukraine. The discussions are focused on restoring embassy operations after years of dispute, restricted movements, visa delays, and frozen diplomatic properties. Russia says sanctions have made it difficult to pay its diplomats, while US envoys report limited mobility inside the country. However, officials say war in Ukraine is absolutely not on the agenda. Defense ministers from 30 countries are meeting at NATO headquarters in Brussels on Thursday to discuss proposals to create a reassurance force for Ukraine. It's aimed at ensuring a stable post-conflict peace deal. The group is being named as the Coalition of the Willing and is led by France and the UK. It comes as global efforts to broker a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine are facing growing challenges. However, US will not participate in the discussions. It follows a decision by President Donald Trump's administration to refrain from participating. Ukraine says that Russia launched a series of drone attacks in the region on Wednesday night. 12 people were injured, according to local officials, and 9 buildings and 30 garages were damaged by fires. Kiev was simultaneously under attack, according to Ukrainian Defense Ministry. They say that 30 drones targeted the capital, with 16 of those shot down. Russia denies targeting civilians. And more on the war in Ukraine. Joining us now live from Kiev, Ukraine is Andrei Ordinovich, former military retired colonel and defense expert. Before retiring from the armed forces of his country after 42 years of military service, his last post was deputy head of M2M Cooperation Directorate of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Mr. James, thank you for inviting me to this broadcast.
Thank you. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has recently claimed that at least 155 Chinese citizens are fighting for Russia in the war, with this being the very first official allegation by Kiev that China was supplying Russia with manpower. What is the extent of Chinese support for Russia's war efforts in reality?
It is not surprisingly for me when our president announced about the presence of Chinese nationals in this war against Ukraine. We captured 2 of them, but based on our intelligence report, it's close to 155, but I believe it is not full scale of their presence. The China playing this kind of games, they are trying to be to help to put a peace settlement in different dimension or different directions. But however, Russian use the Chinese military equipment, simple one, not armored, not aircraft, not any ships, but someone for the logistical support, for the bringing people and military servicemen into the area of operation. And it is quite not which supposed to be based on announcement of Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs that they are keeping a neutrality. We can see that Chinese companies are trying to supply Russian company with double-use equipment, including not armored, but another one. It is another way of supporting Russia and be on the this axis of Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea.
Thank you. Specifically, if I may, I would like to ask about President Zelensky's military leadership. The war has changed him in many ways. He looks more authoritative and casts a battle-hardened figure. Do you believe he is also the man to lead the country forward?
Look at President Zelensky was elected with a majority of Ukrainians, 73%. based on our constitution and legislation, if we do have a war or special military status, we are not obliged to have any kind of election. The President Zelensky right now, based on my knowledge, what I know, has a very high support, more than 60% of Ukrainian population. And we do have a democracy, we do have functional parliament, we do have functional government, we do have a judiciary system in place. Our democracy is quite mature to have and respond to this kind of provocation from Russia, what they are telling to put. We would have election, I believe it is no doubt at all, when the situation and security will allow us to do it.
Thank you very much, Andriy Ordinovich. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for inviting one more time, and all the best.
In Gaza, the United Nations says a devastating toll on civilians continues. That's according to UN spokesperson for the Secretary General, Stefan Dujarric, who says the war is leading to further deaths, displacements, and the destruction of official infrastructure. Meanwhile, the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs reports that humanitarian operations remain severely constrained due to expanding military missions and an ongoing blockade of humanitarian aid and commercial goods, now in its fifth week. And Stefan Dujarric also states that there is still no safe place for the Palestinians to flee to.
Thousands of families are on the move yet again, fleeing bombardment, shelling, and repeated displacement orders issued by the Israeli authorities. But as we have warned repeatedly, there is no safe place in Gaza. And as we've repeatedly said, civilians must be protected, whether they stay, whether they leave. Those fleeing the fighting must be allowed to do so safely, and they must be allowed to voluntarily return when the situation allows. Since yesterday, the Israeli authorities have denied 8 of our 14 attempts by aid workers to coordinate access to people needing urgent assistance. Overall, since the intensification of the hostilities on March 18th, the authorities denied 68% of our 170 attempts to coordinate attempts to reach people across the Gaza Strip and to assist them with humanitarian assistance.
Tens of thousands of protesters took to the streets in Buenos Aires. They are demonstrating against Argentinian President Javier Milei's benefit cuts, which they argue have impacted their livelihoods. The demonstration is ahead of a 24-hour general strike.
Thousands of retirees and union members protested in the Argentine capital, Buenos Aires, on Wednesday to protest against President Javier Milei's reforms. The demonstration was ahead of a 24-hour strike affecting various sectors. Protesters say they want the government to be accountable for the reduced inflation, poverty, and the weakening of Argentina's democracy. It follows Milei's actions as he seeks to continue to reduce social spending and reduce the bureaucracy. The country's largest unions supported the gathering, with demonstrators frustrated over the pension cuts.
We are here on Wednesdays to regain the dignity that this government didn't give us. Since this government took over, they took away our medicine. We lost 8% purchasing power when they devalued. Then Congress approved that restitution and they vetoed it. The president vetoed it, and on top of that he had a barbecue celebrating what they did to us.
My pension is 270,000 pesos, around $251 US. It's not enough to buy meat or pay for utilities. I can't even buy my medication. I had prostate cancer surgery 2 years ago, and they've left me without medication.
The Argentine deputy for the Left Front says it's the retirees who've been disproportionately hit the hardest with cuts to their incomes and benefits.
I believe the Milei government has decided to adjust with the retirees' salaries, so he will achieve a fiscal surplus, which he boasts about. But the big cut was to the retirees' salaries and That's expressed here. Retirees can't live, they can't make it to the end of the month. They cut their medications, their public health insurance for retirees, everything. So I think it's healthy that they don't leave the streets. As they say, if they don't solve our problem, they won't get us out of here.
Despite President Milei's success in lowering inflation, critics say his approach has worsened social inequality and ongoing hardships. And they say his actions have moved the country into a recession. Meanwhile, the International Monetary Fund says it's reaching a preliminary agreement with Argentina for a $20 billion deal. It's despite Argentina owning the IMF more than $40 billion already.
A high-level meeting between Israeli and Turkish delegations was held to discuss diplomatic and security issues. The information was shared on the official X social media platform of the President of Israeli Prime Minister's office. It was stated that the meeting was held following the directive of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The Israeli delegation was led by National Security Council Director and senior officials from the Ministry of Defense and the Security Services also took part in the delegation. In a post on X, the Prime Minister's office thanked Azerbaijan and President Ilham Aliyev for hosting important talks. The Azerbaijani Defense Ministry says that its military positions were subjected to fires from Tovuz Gala direction last night. According to the ministry, at about 11:50 p.m. on the 9th of April, Armenian forces opened fire from positions stationed in the direction of the Muskan settlement in Tovuz-Gala region. Azerbaijan officials say its troops responded with what it's called adequate retaliatory measures to neutralize the threat. No casualties have been reported so far, and the situation is said to be under control. Azerbaijan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs has extended its condolences to the Dominican Republic. It's after a roof collapsed at the nightclub in Santo Domingo on Tuesday night. At least 184 people were killed and there were more than 150 injured. In a statement shared on X media, Baku authorities expressed sympathy to the government and the people and wished a swift recovery to those injured. Emergency crews say they will continue to work until the last body is found. The incident prompted international messages of support. The second Sustainable Construction Summit was held at Seabreeze Resort, co-organized by the Azerbaijan Industrial Safety Association, Public Union, and PMD Projects LCC under the theme People, Planet, Prosperity.
When we think about sustainable construction, what comes to mind? Concrete, steel, and lots of green. But no one truly thinks that these projects are actually building the future of the planet. In this summit, we're discussing how to serve both the environment and the economy of the future.
Can a balance between environmental responsibility and economic development truly be achieved? The answer is yes. We learned that at the Sustainable Construction Summit that brought together 7 keynote speakers and 250 executives, managers and decision makers. Co-organised by Azerbaijan Industrial Safety Association and PMD Projects, key discussions focused on environmental protection and efficient resource use, urban planning trends and innovation in green construction. Experts agreed that apply sustainability principles in project management is the key matter at stake.
If we wouldn't set this balance between the construction and the sustainability, between the green sensitivity to the other segmentations of the real estate, we would have a nice, we wouldn't have a nice future for all of us. So that's a mandatory, and that's one aspect of that question. Another aspect is when you make an investment to the real estate industry, it should be sustainable as well. Otherwise, you will lose money.
Sometimes green solutions in construction are so innovative that it feels like we're not building, but creating a futuristic city. But the question is, can green construction be as strong as concrete?
capitalization of real estate market in the world is around $380 trillion, where sustainable construction just takes only 0.1% of this value, which shows how much perspective is still there. So it shouldn't be only as a trend and as a kind of extra value or added value. The sustainable construction is the mainstream of future. So we have to invest. This is now the position where we have no other choice other than investing into the sustainable construction.
A Davos-style follow-up panel discussed the Sustainable Green Construction Declaration, where experts were keen to raise concerns and express their opinions. The companies that contributed to the development of the construction sector honoured with the Builders' Awards ceremony. The summit reaffirmed that sustainable construction is a shared responsibility shaping the future of urban development.
That's all we have for now. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News.